So I'm joined today by Nick Francis in a slightly unusual interview around the theme of health coaching. Nick's an ex-army commander, served in the Ebola crisis and tours in Afghanistan, but also now teaches engineering in the building profession and academically. And interesting in our discussions, Nick, there seems to be some parallels with what we do in health coaching. We might find our way to that. But thank you very much for coming on. And perhaps you want to introduce yourself more formally. What do you do now, Nick?
Hello. Yeah, thanks, Ollie. So I am, I've got a number of roles. I am the Director of Education for an organisation called the Get It Right Initiative. And that is a construction industry body that is focusing on preventing error in the construction industry, because it turns out this is a massive problem. It costs the UK industry about £21 billion a year in errors, so mistakes people make. And so we're focusing on behaviour change, system change to prevent those errors from happening. So that's one of my roles as Director of Education. And I also teach at the University of Sheffield. So I'm a lecturer in civil engineering and management. And my real passion, I'm an engineer by background, and my real passion is the overlap between technical solutions and human behaviours, and how those two things mesh together, and how an outcome depends on both of those things. Any of those in isolation just doesn't quite work.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And that's what got us thinking about this in terms of the health sector, isn't it? Because often that's what we're doing as well, isn't it? We're trying to mesh really high tech and great sophistication and medication with people, be they the doctors and nurses or the people actually living lives with these conditions. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, but I can't help but wanting to start with your experience in the Ebola crisis, because that was quite a time for you, wasn't it?
Yes, and so that was quite formative for me. So in 2014, you may remember there was the Ebola crisis, and I was in a technical role in the army at the time. So I was in command of what's called a specialist team of Royal Engineers. So we do technical engineering design and managing construction projects. So I was sent out with my team to design and build the emergency Ebola hospitals out in Sierra Leone. And I went over there sort of thinking of myself as a technical expert, and I was going to go and deliver a technical construction project. And what became apparent throughout the crisis was that we were only able to succeed through the combination of, yes, we needed that technical engineering know-how, but we were only able to succeed with all of the management, leadership, and soft skills, communication skills that I'd been lucky enough to build up through the other part of my army career. And it was only by bringing those two together that we were able to succeed. And I think that for me was quite a seminal moment in realizing that it doesn't matter how good the technical solution is, if you don't get the people part right, it's irrelevant.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, I guess we, as a layperson from the army, I always think of the army as being the ultimate command and control, and you just follow orders and instructions. But it seems it's not quite like that in the modern day.
No, it really isn't at all, and that is a common perception from the outside, is that people just do what they're told. Actually, for certainly since the Second World War, that has not been the case in military doctrine. Rely very heavily on a thing called mission command, and that basically the whole premise is that you clearly have a hierarchy in the army. There is a hierarchy, there's someone in charge, and people have to do what they're told. But the whole premise is you don't tell people what to do, you tell them what outcome to have. And what is tremendously powerful is training people and understanding people enough and empowering people so that they can achieve the thing they are asked to achieve. And that's the whole idea of mission command, is you don't tell people exactly what to do, you tell them what outcome to have, and then you trust and empower people to do the thing that is most appropriate in that particular situation to achieve the outcome they need. Now, clearly this differs from situation to situation, and the more highly skilled the team, the more experience they've got, the more freedom people have. So at its lowest level, you might just tell people march over there. But actually, when it's really when the situation is most complex, that's when you need to ensure that all everyone involved has the freedom to do the most appropriate thing, because of course they're the ones that actually understand the situation. If you're relying on one person at the top telling everyone else what to do, well, that person probably isn't going to know the right answer because they can't see everything that those people underneath can see.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's parallels in there between I suppose in the army, there's a sort of shared purpose. We know we're trying to get around that towards that shared purpose. I think in health, we're really trying to build it around what matters most to each individual, and that the heart of what we do. So many parallels, really interesting. So and so now you're not in the army anymore, and you're working in with the building sector. Tell us a little bit more about that then.
Yes, so the Get It Right initiative, I've been working with Get It Right initiative for 5 or 6 years now. So that body was formed when a group of senior leaders from different companies got together at the Institution of Civil Engineers and essentially looked at each other and concluded that all of their organizations were losing a lot of money due to error, but they didn't really know how much they were losing, and they didn't know why it kept happening. So some research was funded by, I think, the Construction Industry Training Board, and it started to understand the common themes that were root causes of error. What are things that often occur before an error happens? Off the back of that research, I was involved in developing schemes of training that the aim of those is to target the root causes of error. So the sort of direct approach that might be the simplest approach is to go, well, we need to spot when there's an error coming and not do anything and make sure that doesn't happen. So you do something to prevent an individual error. But this approach is sort of a step further and going, well, no, we're not going to try and identify the individual errors. What we're going to do is we're going to recognize the things, the conditions that lead to error, and we're going to try and change those conditions so that errors don't occur. So that was fascinating, developing these education programs, because again, it started out the idea being, oh, well, we just have to directly teach these things. And what we found was that if you essentially invite a bunch of people from the construction industry, some of them might not particularly like being hauled into a room and told, you make a lot of errors, I'm going to teach you how to do your job better.
So these are builders, foremen, managers of buildings.
Yeah, so a full cross section of people, and we've got various different streams of training. So some of them are for what we call the supervisors and managers. So you'd think of as like a site foreman who's directly supervising work on a building site day to day, and everything that entails. Quite a robust physical type of environment, and then also through designers, managers, people who'd imagine probably more office and computer based, all the way through to very senior leaders of these organizations and senior leaders of these project teams. And at all levels, nobody's going to appreciate being told, go on a course because you make lots of mistakes and we're going to tell you how to do your job better.
Yeah. And
what we found was that we were really looking at behavior change, and we started to emerge that there was really 3 themes that came out. And one of the themes was behaviors, the next theme was communication, and the next theme was processes. And really, if we can get those 3 themes, then we're going to be setting the conditions to avoid error. And of course, when you start looking at education around behavior, around communication, particularly those 2, a didactic form of education isn't going to be effective. And I think that's where a lot of our conversations suggest that coaching, we might not use that term, but it is very much, there's a lot of overlap between, if we're looking at behavior change, improving communication, there's a lot of overlap, I think, with some of the coaching that we've spoken about.
Yes, and what it seemed to me is that that you use coaching in your training, but actually what you're encouraging people to do on building sites is to create a coaching culture in that context, so that people think for themselves and prepared to sort of put their hand up when they spot something going wrong. Have I got that right?
So that is absolutely key. And what we've identified is that the way people behave is clearly at the heart of whether or not things end up going right or wrong. And when we think about behavior, we can think about it as you've got helpful behavior and unhelpful behavior. So you might have that going left to right. And then you've got this other thing where you can think of it in terms of agreement, which is people doing exactly what they're told to do. almost like a robot. They're doing exactly what they're told. And you can think of that up here. And you've also got challenge, which might be people thinking for themselves. So you can think of this as different quadrants. So you've got helpful, unhelpful, and then agreement, doing exactly what you're told, challenge, thinking for yourself. And when you think about, well, do I want people in the industry to be doing exactly what they're told? You're like, well, that sounds good. And then you say, well, actually, do I want people to think for themselves? Oh, that sounds good too. So you're not quite sure. Are we wanting robots who do exactly what they're told, or are we wanting everyone to think for themselves? Well, you don't want everyone arguing, and you don't want everyone doing something different, but you equally don't want people who don't think. And what we identify is that there's this real danger area here, certainly within the construction industry, which is if you have people engaging what we call unhelpful agreement, and that is your job's worth. That is someone doing what they're told, even if it's not the right thing or the helpful thing to do. They're ticking the box, but they're not doing anything helpful. And the Goldilocks zone, the perfect bit, is down here, which is where people are doing everything they can to help, but they are willing to question, they are willing to challenge. And this is where suddenly you've got everyone thinking, and invariably, if there is an error being made, somebody somewhere will recognize that that is not going to work. So somebody, almost always somebody will go, I'm not sure about that, I don't think this is going to be right, and somebody has not spoken up, and then it happens, and then it's a right pain to try and put right afterwards. So what we really want is to recognize, how do we get this behavior down here where everyone is confident to speak up, everyone is trying to achieve the same aim or working for a positive outcome, but people are able to speak up. And from our conversations about coaching, this is where
Yeah, it's what really interests me about it, Nick, because it's, even though you're in a completely different sector, the building trade, so many parallels, isn't there? I think what we're trying to do with health coaching is, enable NHS staff to work with their patients in such a way that they are thinking for themselves. It's not just I just follow the instructions, doctor knows best, or of course people think for themselves anyway, but we want them to think really well in a really helpful way for themselves. And you have that relationship, I guess, don't you, then, as a healthcare professional, where you're encouraging their thinking, you're challenging each other. It's okay to disagree and to, what do I know about someone's life situation and their context and their priorities? But I'm also interested in how I can improve their thinking and improve their knowledge and the information they might need. So it's really interesting that, and that, I guess, at the root of it is that you're wanting your system to perform well. We want people to experience really good health so they can achieve the things they want in life. Health is not a root cause in itself, is it? It's an enabler for a good life. And I guess with your situation, you're trying to avoid errors so that unpleasant things don't happen in the building industry, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. And it's something that's a constant challenge, is to quantify the impact of these behaviors. And the big challenge for us is that errors and bad outcomes in construction are sort of inherently hidden. It's a commercial setting. Nobody wants to post on social media or talk about the stuff that's gone wrong. Nobody, it's in a lot of people's interest to keep that hidden. So it's not very open when there are errors.
Yeah, it's the same in healthcare. Sorry to interrupt
No.
you. Just the same. People don't like to talk about things that go wrong, and equally as well, you can't tell when you stop something going wrong. Everyone wants to treat the heart attack or stroke in the quickest possible way, but of course the best outcome in the system is not having the heart attack or stroke in the first place, because you've looked after yourself. So it's really hard, isn't it? I'm really interested in what you're going to say about this now, because there's so many parallels there.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's exactly the same where, for us, if you at the last moment stop an error, well, that's really good that you've stopped the error, but you've already had, it's still a mess at that point. If you go, oh, hang on, that's wrong. And what is so much more difficult to spot, exactly as you described, is the error never even starting to happen. And I suppose in healthcare, someone not even starting to get unwell. That's the best possible outcome, and very difficult to measure. And so we are constantly working to quantify the outcomes and gather metrics, and we've got to get this balance between sort of anecdotal, almost a feel for it. We feel like this is the right thing to do, and I think there's a really interesting question about the role of metrics in our decision making, because there is I think we are, it is normal now to say we are evidence based. Everyone likes that. We go, we're evidence based.
Same in health. Yeah.
But there's a little, I see there's a risk in that, because actually you can reword that and say, we don't do anything until there's evidence for it. Now, if there is something that is quite obviously the right thing to do, not doing it until you get evidence, even though it's really, really hard to find the evidence, isn't necessarily the best outcome. And I'd always slightly challenge the evidence-based. I mean, clearly we should be evidence-based. You know, that's a good, obvious thing to do. But sometimes we need to ask the question of, is there evidence that this is not the right thing to do? So if there's something that we think is the right thing to do, let's not necessarily wait until there's evidence it's the right thing to do. If there is evidence it's not the right thing to do, then absolutely we shouldn't do it. But we need to be very careful that we don't get trapped into not doing things that are beneficial just because we haven't yet been able to gather the evidence. Because actually, as well, you won't get the evidence until you try something. I mean, that's almost the nature of evolution, is you've got to try something in order to find out whether it works. So it's a hard. I don't know.
Let's come back to this, because I'm interested in just for people listening, because you run these courses for builders. You know, I've got this image of people there with their UGG boots on and their hard hats. Do you know what I mean? You know, sort of like coming into your course. So what sort of things do you teach people then that are going to enable their building sites to work better? Where do you go with it?
Well, so we've got 3 different streams of training. So we've got a stream for senior leadership and management of projects and organizations. We've got a stream for what we call the interfaces. So they're people who normally office-based, computer-based professionals who interface with each other, and then the supervisors and managers who directly supervise works on site. So one of the key things, if I focus on the supervisors and, who are directly leading and influencing other people day in, day out, we look at their behavior, or we get them to look at behavior, and what we don't do is tell them what to do. What we do is basically provide a handrail for them to explain what is the problem, what are the problems they face, what have they seen, what are the daily challenges, and once they've done that, we actually use a lot of very practical exercises. So we use a lot of Duplo, get people building things out of Duplo, and
like Lego, right?
Like Lego, big Lego, big Lego, yeah, big Lego,
yeah.
Big Lego, yeah. So you know, and it's sometimes people are quite surprised, because you know these are professional people who work in a high-tech industry, and then we get them playing with big Lego. But what we do is we set them some challenges, you know, seemingly simple tasks, and they have to work in a team, build the thing. And invariably, there are some errors. And what that does is it gives us a way to discuss a potentially contentious subject, which is, you know, why do things go wrong on your site? But in a completely objective way, and going, okay, what happened during that exercise? And then one thing is there's no escaping it. If something went wrong in the exercise, it's the wrong shape. So you can't ignore it. It actually is wrong. So it's objective. And then you challenge people to explain what happened and why it happened. And the thing that is just consistently amazing is, almost without fail, people can explain exactly what the problem was or exactly why it happened. And the temptation, I think, when running training is to do that bit and explain to people why things go wrong and feel like I'm the clever one, I'm the trainer, I know the answers. But it turns out that everyone knows the answers themselves. So through the Duplo exercises, we get people to explain it themselves, and they often explain it far better than I or any of the other trainers could do, because they're experts in it. And then we ask the so what question, which, well, so what? What does that mean?
What are the themes that come out then? What are the things that they recognize cause problems?
Well, there's various common pressures. So time,
Mhm.
feeling under pressure, possibly the wrong voices within a group being listened to, the loudest person in the group being listened to, even though someone else in the group knew a better way of doing something. Poor communication between different group members, an unwillingness to ask questions, an unwillingness to say, oh, I'm not sure about this. Let's pause and check. So it comes back to that, these sorts of behaviors and the way people communicate.
That sort of helpful, I guess that what you said before, that helpful challenge, people thinking well for themselves. So that's so interesting, isn't it? Actually, you get these group of people together, you get them to think well together as a group in a very sort of challenging environment when you're potentially sort of shining a light on things that can go wrong. And the conclusion they come to is that we need to create this culture in building sites and workplaces where people think for themselves and are safe to challenge each other and listen to each other.
Yeah, exactly. And are willing to ask a question. And it's the, what comes out loud and clear is nobody wants to get this wrong. Nobody ever wants the wrong outcome.
Yeah.
But there are myriad other factors that influence our behavior. And it might be, I don't want to look stupid, or I don't want to get shouted at, or I don't want to come into conflict with this person who's told me what to do, so I'm going to shut up, or I'm slightly intimidated by these other people in the group, or I don't feel confident, what if I say the wrong thing? And all these layers and layers of barriers that actually trip us up. And knowing the right thing to do isn't what we need to teach, because that's in there. That is in there already. It's exposing these other things that influence our behaviors and often our processes as well. What a process is going, well, I've told I had to fill in this form, so I filled in the form, not understanding, well, you've got it would be better if you questioned that or thought yourself.
And this is where the layers of culture come in, I guess, that you have to have that culture all the way through the system. So you train the senior bosses, the middle managers, and the on-site supervisors in this culture.
Well, what is so interesting, if we go back to that behaviors, you've got this death zone up here of unhelpful agreement, and then you've got the good zone here, is you can very, very quickly start to decode what type of factors lead people to behave in this way. And if someone is scared of reprisals, someone feels that they're not listened to, someone doesn't really understand why they're doing something, someone feels unfairly treated, someone has seen someone else being penalized or punished for something they've done. Those are all things that can drag people's behavior up here. And then you've got the mirror image and say, well, what might drag people down here? Well, being asked open questions, being asked their opinion, seeing other people being rewarded for, contributing or asking questions. So, and actually what you're talking about in terms of the leadership is that even if we, educated everybody and really got this working well at the basic level, if the boss then walks onto site and shouts at someone for, something they shouldn't, then suddenly you can drag a whole bunch of people up there. Or if your process means that, I don't know, you get paid for doing things quickly, not for doing things well. You get paid for turnover, you get paid for the amount of concrete you pour, not for whether or not you get it right. Then suddenly there are things that can drag the behavior up here. So we're really about trying to identify what are the other factors that are pulling people up here, and how can we make sure that our behaviors, communication, and processes are all working to get us down in this corner.
I'm sure people listening to this with a health context will be thinking of so many similarities for us. It's so important that the culture pervades everything, isn't it? But I mean, I'm interested, Nick. I mean, have you got any examples of where this has happened? This is played out in the building sector, and because sometimes tangible examples can bring it to life, can't there?
So, I mean, one One that I was aware of was where we were running a workshop on so it was a major road building scheme. I think it was an extension to an A road over a motorway. And we were running a workshop for what we call a principal contractor. So they're the main, the main people dealing with the project. And they invited their subcontractors, their piling subcontractors, into these workshops. So the piles, they were building a large bridge over a motorway, and the piles are like the big columns that go into the ground that hold the bridge up. So it's the really big, heavy foundations that go under the bridge. And normally in these sorts of commercial contracts, there would be a risk of silos between these different disciplines, and people they'd be hesitant to talk about problems. But actually, through one of the workshops, this company brought in their subcontractors, so the people who worked for them, and over a while they started to learn to trust each other more and were able to listen to each other's concerns. And it was identified that there was one of the techniques they were doing that was going to potentially get some of these piles in the wrong place. Now, the impact of that could have been massive, because it would have, well, firstly, they'd have to do the whole thing twice, so massive extra resource and environmental damage and cost, but huge time impact, lots of impact on the local community, roads shut for weeks and weeks more, really negative outcome for everybody involved. But actually, by inviting in people who maybe wouldn't normally contribute to these higher level conversations and creating the conditions that meant they were confident to speak up, it meant that these things were exposed and could be addressed as a team, and as a consequence, these errors were avoided. So in that instance, a very tangible, these massive lumps of concrete would have been in the wrong place, and the impact would have been hundreds of thousands of pounds and months of delay. And actually, that was avoided just by getting the right people to feel confident and comfortable to speak up and contribute at the right time and be listened to.
Yeah, it's interesting. So fascinating. I mean, what I've loved about talking to Nick about this is that the culture of coaching, that coaching culture that we're trying to build in the NHS, where we're trying to trust each other, where the culture is that people are thinking for themselves, be it staff or and we're trying to translate that down into how we then work with patients so that they think for themselves and question stuff and start to look out for themselves in a more positive way. It's just played out in both the building sector and in the military sector as well. It's just fascinating, isn't it? Maybe this is a culture that we all need to try and get more familiar with across society, do you think?
Well, I absolutely think so. I'm interested by what you said there about a coaching culture as opposed to teaching coaches. So, and I think that's definitely where I can see the benefit is this should be a normal behavior across everyone, or across the people you're concerned with, not having an individual coach who is sort of, almost, I think the risk is you think of coaching as a replacement for the boss, and the boss is replaced by a coach. And actually, that's not what I'm hearing you saying.
I think I'm seeing that's a sort of traditional way, isn't it? I think, often we, as doctors and nurses, we've thought of ourselves as that sort of quite directive coach, where we, listen to you, use our skills and knowledge to sort of understand your problem. We diagnose a problem, we formulate a plan, and it's a very one-sided sort of thing. And actually, I think the culture we're moving to is that actually it's much more collaborative and much more partnership based. And we recognize the expertise of people living with their condition. But, we also recognize people have different skill sets as well and different capabilities. So we've got to be clever in how we support people. There are some times, of course, where we do need to absolutely jump in. I guess if that bridge was cracking about to fall down, you'd have to jump in, wouldn't you? And
yeah,
simply, if people are in desperate straits with a crisis, then we have to jump in. But
I think that's really interesting, that point you bring out, because I think there's a possible risk of seeing coaching as an alternative to the technical expertise, and it absolutely isn't. It's not an alternative to that. You still need an engineer to be able to do some complicated calculations and analysis to work out if something works and what to do. But I think what it is knowing it's how to place that expertise where it is needed and not allow that to accidentally squeeze out this myriad other behaviors and ownership. And I think that's the risk, isn't it? That
it's not either or, is it? And it's an and thing, isn't it? Actually,
yeah.
and I guess the realization for me as a having been a GP for many years is that you can get sucked into the technical stuff. You know, there's lots of guidance around it. There's lots of sort of research and evidence around it. But unless you have the sort of coaching context and culture, and people do feel empowered and enabled, all the tech in the world only goes so far.
Well, I think it's interesting that being sucked into the technical solution, because I think it comes from both sides. Because I think actually, you know, in my language, that the client, so the person receiving the service, they probably come and ask for that. You know, certainly in our sector, the client would come and say, I want you to do X. I want you to build a wall here, or, you know, put in this beam, or, and they say, I want the solution. So they're asking for the technical solution. And then as the one delivering it, that is a comfortable situation to be in, because you're like, well, I can do that. This gives me ownership of it. I am being asked for this. I'm being rewarded for giving a technical solution. So they're asking for it and you're wanting to give it. But that doesn't mean it's the right solution. And so actually that's why I think sometimes it can be quite challenging to say, well, let's move to a different system where everyone has a say. I mean, in engineering, it is very, very exposing for an engineer to ever say, oh, I don't really know. I mean, the truth is engineers don't really know 90% of the time. They're very well educated and they can take, you know, they can make very safe decisions, but they don't specifically know exactly how every bit of material in every structure is working. But nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear an engineer say, well, I don't really know how this building stands up, but I can, you know, with all my expertise, I can tell you it's safe, but I can't tell you exactly why. But actually what I think we're recognizing is that if you create that space and go, well, you know, I can write you an equation that would prove that this bit's okay, but actually I don't have all the answers. What do you think we should do here? That is very exposing to you're sort of handing over some of your power by opening it up to people who don't have your badge as being an expert. But I think can be tremendously exciting because the outcomes can just be so much better.
It's interesting. So you're creating new relationships and new outcomes, and I think that there's so many parallels, you know, as we said, between what we're doing now as healthcare professionals with this new partnership with patients and a more coaching style. We still need the technical skills, and we won't want to lose any of those. And the technical development, the digital transformation, you know, they're all great enablers, aren't they? But I guess our whole premise of peak health coaching and trying to create a coaching culture is that we think these will work so much better in that environment, and it's just fascinating to hear it's similar even in the building trade and even in the army, Nick. So thank you so much for just shining a light on so many things. I think, you know, that sort of moving down to that sort of, you know, what am I getting on my screen here, this bottom quadrant here, where we're encouraging people to think well for themselves and be challenging, but in a safe context where it's welcomed and there's a culture of welcoming, and that sort of thing is great. Fantastic. Well, maybe we'll talk again and see how things are going as we struggle with this ultimate thing of trying to sort of prove it as well, isn't it? I guess maybe that's the final place we should come to. Do you think that you talked about the data and stuff? Have you got ideas about where you'll go with this as a training organization or as in the building culture? What will they do? What will they measure?
So we are constantly, you know, gathering data and attempting to. So we're rolling out various programs of education now, and in some of those where we are rolling out education schemes on projects, we are selecting parallel projects where we're not rolling it out in order to gather data. Now that is, you know, as with any of these things, it's inherently fraught with challenge, because there are lots of things that can influence whether one project is successful or one project is not. So it's a question of, can you gather enough data to be able to correlate the thing you're trying to measure? But there's just a lot of noise. You know, there are millions of things that can be happening, and to try and isolate that is hard. I think the only thing
I
we can
suppose
do
it's
is,
big bucks. It's big bucks for the building sector. And you started off saying the bosses wanted to do this because they
yeah,
realize they're
yeah,
going to
it is.
save a whole lot of money. I mean, I guess in healthcare, money comes into it, but there's also human lives as well, isn't there? I suppose if a bridge falls down, there's potential human life lost
Yeah.
as well. So,
Well, that's the other thing that I think is so interesting in our sector is that from 1974, the Health and Safety at Work, or 74, I might get that wrong. The Health and Safety at Work Act was introduced, and that ushered in a total transformation in terms of safety. But that was because it changed where the responsibility sat. So construction safety, suddenly the bosses of companies would go to jail if someone died on their site. So that definitely focused minds. And we have seen that safety journey started off with a stick, with, there's punishment. And that was the directive, you must make sure that people don't get hurt. And that went some way. But actually, the real change has been through behavioural change, and it's been amazing to watch the way that the attitude towards safety has changed within construction. And now, on any major building site, without fail, pretty much everyone feels empowered to speak up. If they see something unsafe, they know they won't get in trouble for speaking up. They'll get in trouble for staying quiet. Because culturally, that has changed. You will get in trouble for staying quiet about something if you know it's going to go wrong.
That's so fascinating. It makes me think there of just an interview I did just recently with one of our patients, Frank, and he said it's really interesting that you never used to say anything to the doctor. You never used to sort of question what they said, or sort of even object to anything, or sort of suggest any possible alternatives. But fortunately, we have moved on from that culture, and it sounds like that's the same culture you're after as well.
Yeah, really interesting. That's probably a whole other kind of worms.
Brilliant, Nick. I know we're coming to the end of our time, and we better stop there. But thank you so much. Really enjoyed that conversation. Thanks a lot.
Magic. See you soon.
Cheers, Nick.